Yeah, me too. Absolutely, me too. What I like to say is listening is a practice. And the great thing is we have the opportunity to practice it every day. I got into it totally accidentally, to be honest with you, and I'm so glad that I did. I was going to graduate school for communication, and I was paired with an advisor who was a world expert in listening. And I told him within the first 2 weeks of meeting him, Andy, I'm not going to become a listening person. And he said, that's okay, Lauren, you can be whatever you want to be. And so I studied for a year and a half, and I didn't know exactly what a listening person was, but it just didn't sound like something I would want to be until that final semester was rolling around and we were signing up for classes. And I started thinking politically, as in, you know what, he's going to be writing my letters of recommendation. I should probably show a little bit of interest in what he's interested in. So I signed up for his listening course, and within 2 weeks, it totally changed my life. I thought, this is what listening is? Why don't people know what listening is? So I've spent the last 20 years researching, studying, training, and teaching listening. And my goal really is to bring listening to the masses. And I'm really particularly grateful for speaking with Junior League tonight because I know that your mission is to create better communities. And one of the ways that we can create better communities is really through better relationships. That's what listening does, is it brings us better relationships. So if we improve that, we improve relationships, better relationships improve our community. So we're all working in the same direction, and I really appreciate that. So let me see if my screen share works. Look at that, it does, but you're not supposed to be looking at my notes screen. There we go. So I've got 3 practical tips for better listening, whether at work or at home. Because the great thing about listening and listening skills is we do it everywhere. It's the communication activity that we spend most of our day engaging in. And so if we can learn to do that better, that's only going to improve us. I'd like everybody to find the chat, whether or not you're on video. Go ahead and find the chat. Put your hands on the chat because I'm going to give you 10 seconds to finish this sentence. Okay, eyes on the chat, and here you go. An effective listener always finish that sentence. Nods, waits, makes eye contact, looks at the speaker, pays attention to the one speaking, gives eye contact, waits, acknowledges, waits, listens, pauses before responding, digest what the other says, let the other finish their train of thought before adding their commentary. And I love what you all wrote, and hopefully by the end of this, you're going to see if what you wrote actually coincides or correlates with the research or not. Oh, I like this last one, Lexi, thank you. Pauses before responses, repeats back for understanding. I think you're gonna already get an A, Lexi. So what I'm going to cover today are 3 problems with communication and listening, and then 3 listening skills that can help solve those problems so we can all become a more effective listener. The first problem is we don't know why we do it. We don't know why we do it. Why do we communicate? And if you were unmuted, some of you would say, well, we communicate to send messages. But is that really true? Because if we're just sending messages, then aren't we just self-broadcasting? And we don't know if anybody there is there to receive them or not. So it's kind of like Facebook. Facebook is one of those vehicles where you can just self-broadcast. You can just tell the world or your network how you feel about something, but you never actually have to have an interaction. I study face-to-face communication. So when I use the term communication, I mean face-to-face communication. So why do we communicate? Well, it's not just to send messages. In actuality, our purpose or our goal in communication is to create shared meaning. And I'm going to explain this a little bit because this is one of those things that most people go, oh, I never thought of it that way. The purpose of communication is to create shared meaning. If you look at those two green bubbles, there's your meaning, there's my meaning, and there's shared meaning. And I know that you have people in your life where those bubbles overlap a lot. All you have to do is look at a person a particular way, and that person gets you. But you also have people in your life where it seems like your bubbles are always just bamming against each other and actually not ever overlapping to create that shared meaning. In true communication, what we're trying to do is get the picture in our mind as close as possible to the picture in the other's mind, as is shown in this middle graphic here. You can imagine that when we add other people to the equation, such as groups, it becomes much more challenging. Those of you who do work at an office or work with other people to get your job done, have you ever gone to a meeting with 4 other people and you thought it was a great meeting and everybody left with the same understanding? And then the next day somebody was talking about that meeting, saying things that you don't remember you talked about at all. That's happened to every one of us. And that gets really dangerous because that's why deadlines aren't met, and that's why projects go overtime and overexpense, because we aren't creating the shared meaning so everybody knows what the group is doing. So one of my specialty areas is actually working with leaders and working with teams. And I love to give them just some very simple skills that they can use on a regular basis in their meeting to make sure that people are walking away with the same idea in their head. So when I talk about communication, oftentimes we say, it should be at least a 50-50 split. 50% of your time should be spent speaking and the other 50% should be spent listening. But for leaders and for salespeople, definitely, I would recommend that the ratio be more 20% speaking and 80% listening. And that's because when you're a leader or a salesperson, you already know what you're going to say. And when you're saying it, you're saying stuff that you already know. We only learn when we're actually listening to other people. So actually being quiet and listening to other people is going to give us that high quality information that we need to make better decisions in our lives. You've probably heard God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, because we should be listening twice as much as we're speaking. Or if you're fans of Daniel Covey, you've probably heard first seek to understand and then be understood. And he talks about really listening first to understand the other person and then speaking what you want to say. Problem number 2 then is we don't know what listening is. So how would you define listening? It's one of those goofy things, and oftentimes I say it's like the Supreme Court defined pornography. They said, we can't give you a definition, but we know it when we see it. And oftentimes we think that listening is something that we know when we see, but we can't really tell you what it is. And we're going to solve that problem tonight. Because in communication, listening has 2 major elements. The first is listening is a cognitive or brain-based activity. Okay, so listening actually takes place in our brain because that's where we make meaning. But listening is perceived behaviorally. We look at other people to see if they're listening to us or not. Go ahead and get your hands back on the chat and tell me what you look for to make sure that people are listening to you? What do you look for? So I'm seeing eye contact, leaning in, eyes on me, not elsewhere, eye contact and head nodding. Note taking, I like that one, Crystal, thank you. I'm always a note taker, and as a matter of fact, I've got a piece of paper and pencil over here to be able to take notes. I think that's very important as well. So lots of different things that you look for. I'm going to give you the first piece of information that I think is going to blow your mind. Okay? And it is this: the nonverbals of listening are a social norm. They are in no way related to what's really going on in our brain. Okay. And I want to actually talk about this one a little bit more because it is so big. We generally look at other people to see if they're listening to us or not. And if they've established eye contact with us, if they're nodding and agreeing with us, or even if they're shaking their head no, we think, well, as long, as they're listening to us. But I know that everyone on this call has been a student. And as a student, you taught yourself that great skill of fake listening, right? Remember those courses that you went into? Mine in particular was history in high school. Hated history in high school. But I knew what a good student looked like. So I would go into class, I would always have that piece of paper and pencil, and I would be taking notes and I would be looking at the teacher. And sometimes I would even put my hand on my chin and go, wow, that looks like that's really insightful. But in actuality, I was writing down my shopping list or what I was going to do for the weekend or whatever. And so when I got done with that class, I didn't make any meaning at all with what the teacher had lectured about, but I sure did look like I was listening. So there is absolutely no research in the world that suggests that any nonverbal listening behavior correlates to what's going on in the brain, the comprehension or the meaning making. And this is very important. Now, I'm certainly not going to tell you to not do those social norms because, as you see with the picture on the left, we generally do look for eye contact. That's why it kind of freaked me out when I got on the call and started talking and I didn't see anybody, because we like to think that people are really talking back to us through their nonverbals and engaging with us. You can see that in the left photo, the woman has the eye contact. She has her body towards the speaker, and the other woman has a great facial expression on her. The reason I show you this, two reasons. Number one, first of all, recognize that either of those two women could be fake listening right now. But the other thing that is really important is that since nonverbals are a social norm, and we have to do them because that's what gets us accepted into the society, every culture has different listening behaviors that they look for. So if you are interacting with people from other cultures, whether you go and travel to be in their culture or you lead a team with people from different places, you really need to understand what their social norms are non-verbally, so you can make sure that you do it appropriately and respectfully. This one will blow your mind too. I still can't. I have never visited these cultures, but there are two cultures where this means yes and this means no. Can you imagine listening to somebody from that culture? Because we would be doing what we generally do in the US. This is no and this is yes, but it has the exact opposite meaning for them. So it's very important to understand the cultural norms where you go in terms of what the nonverbals associated with listening are. But back that up again and say, but the nonverbals don't really show listening because people could be fake listening. The picture on the right, I think, is really interesting too. The woman with the beautiful pink hair, and she's blowing a pink bubble. The reason I show you this is because she looks like she's not listening. She looks like she's much more interested in her bubble, but her mind could be making the meaning of what's going on. So simply because people don't look like they're listening doesn't mean that they're not listening. Matter of fact, the most recent research on autism suggests that people with autism and some other learning disabilities such as that can't establish eye contact when they're listening because it is too much stimulation. So there are actually many children, K through 6, K through 12, who can't establish that eye contact to what we think show listening because it actually makes them listen worse. They can't make meaning while they have eye contact. So listening is hard because it takes both the body and the brain. We hear with our ears, but we actually listen with our brains. That's where we listen, is in our brains. So knowing this, I want you to find your chat again, and I'm going to give you a true, false question. So all you have to do is write true or false. And here is the statement. Words have meaning. Words have meaning. True or false? Go ahead and throw it into the chat for me. True, 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 true. We got a false from Andrea. True, 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 true. Where's Andrea? Andrea, would you unmute yourself and tell me why you said false?
Sorry, I would say false because everyone's interpretation of the words is probably a little bit different. So it's really how you interpret the words.
Andrea, you are like the A+ student right now. Okay, the reality is words do have meanings. That's why somebody created the dictionary, right? We can go there and we can look up a meaning. But as Andrea suggested, when we are actually communicating and we use a word that we think everybody else knows, they could be making meaning of that word differently than we do. So a perfect example for you, the word dog. Dog. What do you think of when you hear the word dog? Well, some of you have had great experiences with dogs. So you might think of your favorite dog jumping up on you and licking your face, or playing catch, or going for long walks on the beach, or all of those lovely things that you can do with dogs. But what if you were me and at age 6, you were standing with your younger brother who was 3 years old next to the family dog named Susie, because my mother required that all of our animals be named after her. So we were standing with Susie the dog, who had just been fed. My younger brother John leaned down. I'm not sure exactly what he was going to do, maybe move the dish, maybe pet Susie, I'm not sure. But Susie did not like that. She jumped up and she bit John in the face, bad enough that he had to go get stitches. So I'm standing there watching my brother bleed, and I'm only 6 years old. So from that point on, of course, I became afraid of dogs because they were very unpredictable to me. So for decades, I've had to train myself to not freak out when I see a dog and think that dog is going to attack me. So words do have meaning. I'm going to give you partial credit if you did say true on that, because you're right about the dictionary. But when we exchange words in communication, they have different meanings to people. So words don't make meaning, people make meaning. And we as people can make different meaning to the same word. So question number 3, or problem number 3, we don't know how listening works. What's the process of listening? And I'm happy that I can share this with you, because actually one of the things I didn't tell you is when I was getting my PhD, I actually took a year off to study cognitive psychology, because I figured if I was going to become an expert in listening, I really needed to understand how the brain works. And pretty much, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the brain, and I'm going to show you a typical listening process. And at each part of the process, I'll identify what can go wrong. So the first thing that we generally do there is focus or pay attention. But some of you are a step ahead of me going, well, that's the first place something can go wrong. And that's absolutely correct, because if we're trying to multitask or do two things at once, we're not able to focus on what the speaker is saying. This sometimes doesn't get us into trouble. I will tell you that my guilty pleasure is playing words with friends while I watch television. So I'm working with two different sources that have to do with words. I'm trying to listen to the television and play words with friends. But because it's not another person in the room, I feel like it's okay to not have all my attention focused on one person. But when I'm listening to people, I really do want to put my focus there, because I want to be able to do the next step correctly, which is make meaning. And make meaning as in shared meaning. So trying to understand them as closely as possible. Generally, what happens in the typical listening process after making meaning is evaluation. So we judge what the other person has said. We maybe evaluate it or judge it as, oh, I totally agree with you, or that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And then we respond, and we respond from that place of judgment. But that's problematic, because we haven't made sure that we understood them yet first. So I urge you not to evaluate too quickly, and I fear that our community, our society at large, our planet really has moved here where we evaluate things so quickly before we understand them. We should be listening to understand, not listening to respond. So the ideal listening process then would look like this. You can see that I just switched the response and the evaluation. We focus and pay attention. We make meaning in our mind. Then we respond to confirm meaning, right? I want to make sure that what I heard is actually what you meant. And then we evaluate it. And that may then take up the conversation in terms of agreement, disagreement, perhaps coming to compromise. Okay, what might happen if we didn't evaluate or judge until we really understood and created shared meaning? I want you to think about the groups that you work in to get jobs done. What would happen if everybody understood and had shared meaning after each meeting? Wouldn't that be phenomenal? I can tell you absolutely what would happen is you would meet deadlines, sometimes even earlier. You would reduce money spent on rework, and you would have time for much more creative and fun endeavors. So the goal of listening in communication then is to help create shared meaning. Okay? But therein lies the problem. How do we do that? We don't know how to help create shared meaning. And those three problems really all combine together to make that big problem. We don't know how to create shared meaning. But never fear, Dr. J. Listen, that's my moniker on Twitter. Dr. J. Listen is here to help you. And I want to let you know that it's not your fault that you maybe don't know how to create shared meaning, because only 2% of the population ever has any listening training at all. So the fact that you're here tonight puts you in that 2%, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about it. I've been studying listening for 20 years, and I still don't know everything there is to know about it. But the fact that you're here for an hour and a half tonight, you're going to know more than the average person knows about it. So let me give you some quick solutions tonight, 3 practical listening tips or listening skills that you can implement right away today. So I want you to get something to write on because I do want you to take notes. And the reason I want you to take notes is because even though these 3 things are probably not going to be of a huge surprise to you, you won't practice them unless you have notes to refer back to. Communication is one of those things, it's one of our behaviors. It's a habit, and we don't change our habits unless we try to change our habits. And even when we try to change our habits, if it doesn't come out of our mouth the first time really well, we don't try it again. But actually with communication, we have to keep trying until we get it right. And as full-blown adults, you have been working in your same habits for many decades. So trying to get you to change a habit in just an hour and a half is a real challenge, which is why I'd like you to jot these down. So the first listening skill is called silence. And the goal of silence is to gain more quality information. In the United States, when we speak, we generally leave a half a second of silence between what the speaker just said and what the listener, who then becomes the speaker, says. So about a half a second of silence. That's not an awful lot. But let me contrast that to 2 other cultures for you. That's really fascinating to again show you how listening is different around the world. In Italy, what's most appropriate is to overlap when you speak. You're supposed to interrupt the other person. In the New York Jewish community, too, as was evidenced by research that was done, that's the social norm there. Because it shows that you respect the other person and you want to build the story with them. I know many of you can think of evenings that you went out with your girlfriends that weren't in COVID, and you guys just talked over each other all of the time, and you probably had those great conversations where maybe you would ask a question and 3 people would jump in and talk about something else, and then 45 minutes later somebody would answer that question. And you would know that they were answering the question that you had asked before. So in different communities, there are different social norms with how much space we leave in between. So in Italy, New York Jewish community, and in some of the women's community, we don't leave any space at all because it's showing respect to build this story together. However, in a place like an Asian community, Japan and China, on average, they leave 7 seconds between the speaker and the listener. So the first speaker ends, and then there's 7 seconds. And the reason they do that is to show respect as well. Because what that silence suggests is, I really value what you just said to me, and I want to give it consideration before I respond to it. So I'd like to bring more of that Asian into our culture for a few reasons. How you would do it is when the speaker finishes, I want you to bite your tongue for 3 seconds. I just did that for 3 seconds. And some of you may have gone, oh, wow, she quit talking. But others of you didn't even notice that I paused for 3 seconds. When you pause for 3 seconds, it allows the other person to continue talking if they have something to add, something they forgot to say. I'm going to challenge you even more with this skill of silence, though, because I want you to keep silent. After that 3 seconds, if they haven't started talking yet, I want you to ask one of these questions. What else? Anything more to add? Tell me more about that. I use this often, particularly when I feel like I'm evaluating what the other person said too quickly. I will not respond, but I will say, tell me more about that. Because I want to understand where they're coming from, because my evaluation was probably too quick and incorrect. So this is a very interesting technique to use, and any of you who have children, this works really well with children as well, because they always have more to add too. Listening skill number 2 for tonight is entering their brain or following their thought process. Entering their brain or following their thought process. I love this line. Can you walk me through how you came to that conclusion? Can you walk me through how you came to that conclusion? And I encourage you to do this when you feel evaluation very quickly, either positive or negative. Ask them this question. Don't respond. Respond by asking this question, because you want to get them to continue talking. Recently was working with a coaching client, a young woman, and she had shared with me that she and her fiance often got into fights about politics because they were from 2 different political parties, and she didn't know exactly how to handle that. And so I recommended that she try this, and she contacted me that evening via email, and she said, Laura, I cannot believe how much this helped, because when I asked him this question, we started talking about things that I never knew. And he learned so much about why I believed what I believed too. So it just really opened up the conversation for us, and we didn't fight. We had a good discussion. Okay, we had a good discussion. And that's what we want. We want to be able to understand the other person and realize that understanding doesn't mean agreement. I can understand where you're coming from. I can understand that you have a different value than I do. That doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make me a bad person. It makes us different people with different values. And that's okay. But until we enter their brain to figure out how that thought was created, we're never going to know. So that's listening skill number 2 for tonight. And then listening skill number 3 tonight, one of my favorites, is called confirming. And somebody actually alluded to this when I asked you how you made sure that people understood you. The goal of this is to make sure you've got the meaning right. And it's actually a 2-part skill. So the first part is to paraphrase. And you want to paraphrase in your own words. You don't want to just mirror back what the other person said, but you actually want to put it into your own words and then ask them if you're right. You want to do this in a way that forces them to respond to you verbally. So if I understood you correctly, Caroline, you said blah, 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 blah. Did I get that right? Or another way you can do it is, wait, I want to make sure that I understood what you said. Did you say da 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 da? Is that what you said? And so you have to figure out how to make that your own. But this is the number 1 power skill in terms of aligning communication on a team. If you do this with your teammates and they do it with you, you will leave that meeting with everybody on the same page, which is really wonderful. So listening skill number 3 is confirming or making sure you've got the meaning right. So we're going to actually do a little bit of practice here. I've got, I think Jamie is creating groups right now. She's going to randomly assign people into groups. And there will be 4 people in a group, and you will be in the group for 10 minutes. So I'm giving you ample time to practice these skills tonight. You can do a little bit of networking too while you're in those groups. What I'd like you to ideally discuss is your view of the political climate today. Now, I know many of you are going, Laura, you should never talk about politics. But I totally disagree with you. The only way we are going to become united again in the United States is being able to understand people who believe differently than us so we can work our way into a compromise, not this you're wrong, I'm right, or they say I'm wrong, he's right. We can't do that anymore. So when you get into your groups, I want you to identify who the youngest person is. Youngest person in that group, you are going to be the group leader for this 10 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is start the discussion on the political climate today. Now, of course, I'm not going to be into every group to see if you're actually discussing that topic, but whether you discuss that topic or not, what I really want you to do is practice at least 2 of the different skills. Those of you who are overachievers, try to practice all 3 skills. You really want to practice them and get them coming out of your mouth so they become more natural to you. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? Pretty easy. I've got some head nods here. So Jamie, if you could go ahead and put us into groups for 10 minutes, that would be terrific. See you in 10. you're back and I see you. You're right underneath me on this picture right now. Oh no, where are you guys? Oh, there you are. Oh, I lost you all for a second there. What I'd like to do is get some feedback from how that went. Hey, and how come whenever I'm having a little Zoom problem. I apologize. Okay, go ahead and unmute yourself. I want to get like 5 people's reaction to that. Did you practice the skills? Which skills worked, which didn't? Did you totally forget? I know in my group had a little difficulty practicing the skills. What was your aha?
I think in our group we practiced it and then kind of discussed the impact that it could have in our lives. I think that one of the challenges that I noticed is that I think that these skills will work very well face to face, but some of the awkwardness is kind of exacerbated when we're doing this virtually. But I definitely can envision practical applications with people in my life, and I think it'll be very positive.
Cool. Thanks, Lexi. Somebody else.
I felt that the first skill of waiting 3 seconds and kind of biting your tongue once the person finishes, it felt like a really long time. And I think, what she was saying is that's kind of exasperated on Zoom, but I felt like almost like, oh, I need to respond, but that's like part of it is waiting. So
yeah, Morgan, isn't that funny that we feel like 3 seconds is so long, but when other people do it to us, it's not really that long. So it does give people the opportunity to really think about what you've said. And I totally agree with what Lexi said too, and what Morgan said as well, that, Zoom complicates things a little bit, but these skills do work on Zoom and on the telephone too. Somebody else, feedback, aha, what worked, what didn't?
It seems like we were actually able to get to know one another a little bit because we were being more intentional, or at least I felt like I was being a little bit more intentional. Like instead of just doing an exercise, we kind of started off with just a little bit of an icebreaker, but then it just led into more in-depth conversation. And, it led us to find out more about our fellow member, and that LaToya is very accomplished, and we hope to see her in politics one day. That's just from our group.
That's terrific. So Holly, what do you think that intentionality did for the group in the conversation?
I think it caused us to have a greater connection because we were pausing. And I noticed that when I was speaking to LaToya, when I asked her a question, I did the pause for 3 seconds, and she actually had something to add at the end of what she was saying. And if I wouldn't have waited those 3 seconds, I would have ended up cutting into what she said. And I noticed that for me personally, when I'm speaking on the phone or to someone, sometimes I'll cut into what they're saying just because I'm just eager to say what I want to say. And I'll end up cutting into what they say because they have something else to add. And then I'll have to say something like, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, or, something like that. And when you do the 3 second pause, then, I don't think that would happen as frequently.
Yeah, I love what you said about intentionality and using that 3 second pause to be more intentional. when you think about it with our communication, shouldn't most of our communication be intentional? You know, shouldn't most of it really be intentional? Because that's where we're creating relationships with people. And if we intentionally want to create good relationships, we have to think about how to do that. Give me one more aha. One more aha.
I found myself, as the person was finishing finishing their topic and I had the 3 seconds, I kind of was going through the skill set trying to think, okay, what is the most applicable to say next? Because there are some statements that are really hard to follow with, like, you know, tell me more about that, or, you know, like, so no one said this in our thing, but so if someone says, I like milk, you know, it's like, hey, tell me more about how you like milk. Like, it's kind of hard to figure out, okay, what's the best approach to continue this? And that's where I felt like I got caught up in those 3 seconds. I'm like, okay, like, how do I continue this? What do I have to say? So
yeah, and you're right, Anna, and I appreciate what you just said, because there are some times where there's just no way to follow up with that, except for maybe to say, I like milk too, or what kind do you prefer, right? But usually milk is not, it's probably not a great conversational topic, or maybe it is, because maybe somebody has, an allergy to milk or something, in which case I would recommend Fairlife or something along those lines. So let me I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Oh, good. And you guys are still there, and I like that. Oh, I messed this up because I'm not in the slideshow. But going back to the beginning, when I asked you what an effective listener always does, many of you identified the pausing, which I thought was really interesting, that I recommended the 3 seconds, and the 3 seconds was something that got a lot of discussion. But I would hope that you might say an effective listener always helps to create shared meaning, because an effective listener eventually becomes the speaker. And so it's this whole process that's going on where we're trying to create this shared meaning together. So I know that some of you are employed and some of you are not, but if you're employed or not, you might be members of other groups. So if you know of a group or individual who could use some listening training, I love speaking at things like this. So if you would introduce us through email, I would really appreciate it. I've got 2 different emails there that you could potentially use. And I'm going to invite everybody here to connect with me on LinkedIn. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is because every Tuesday afternoon, evening, I put out a video listening tip of the week. And so I will walk you through in 2 minutes or less a listening skill that you can apply. So it's kind of like having your notes around, but you can learn so much more through that. So I definitely invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then in terms of the groups, if your organization that you work at maybe has a women's resource network or other affinity groups, sometimes they might be interested in the topic of listening as well. So today we looked at 3 problems with communication and listening, and then you're going to walk away with 3 listening skills that you can use tonight to become a better listener. And I'm going to quit screen sharing now and go back to the group. Jamie, are you on here? Is Jamie here? Or
Hey, yeah, I'm still on here.
There you are. Okay. I didn't see your name. I just saw training council.
Yep, it's under training council.
Jamie, would you like to continue the discussion? Do you have anything to add?
I do not have anything to add at this moment.
Perfect. Well, then I'm turning it back over to you since it's your meeting, right?
All right. Yeah.
And
So
I really appreciate you guys were great. Even the ones who didn't show me what you looked like, but thank you to those who did. I really do appreciate that. And I hope to connect with you on LinkedIn.
perfect. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Janusik.
Thank you.
And that concludes this training. Thanks, everyone.